Hello everyone, and welcome back to Mr. Dar's Nights. I know many of you tune in to unwind or drift into a peaceful sleep, so before you close your eyes, drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from. And if you're enjoying these stories, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more. Now, let's get comfortable and let the story begin. The Whispering Shadows, Chapter 1. It was the kind of quiet that felt heavy, the kind that presses down on you, like the air itself is holding its breath. For some, silence was comforting, peaceful even. But for Ethan, that stillness felt like an omen. The kind of omen you can't shake no matter how hard you try. Ethan had moved into the house only 2 days ago, and already he regretted it. The house stood on the edge of town, surrounded by tall, skeletal trees and overgrown weeds. It wasn't much, just an old 2-story building with creaky floors, chipped paint, and a thick layer of dust that seemed to have settled in every corner. The kind of place that looked perfectly fine from the outside, yet when you stepped inside, it felt wrong, as though the house itself was keeping secrets, dark ones. The realtor had told him the house had been empty for years. The previous owners had left in a hurry, but no one could say exactly why. There were rumors, of course, the kind you hear when a house has been abandoned for so long. Stories about strange noises, lights flickering in the middle of the night, and whispers that came from nowhere. But Ethan had brushed them off. He was practical, logical. He didn't believe in ghosts or anything supernatural. He just needed a place to stay, something affordable. The first night had been uneventful. Sure, there were the usual creaks and groans of an old house settling, but nothing that made him feel uneasy. By the second night, though, things started to change. It began with the whispers. At first, it was so faint he thought it was the wind or maybe the house settling. He tried to ignore it, but as the minutes passed, the whispers became clearer. He couldn't make out the words, but there was a rhythmic quality to them, almost like a chant. It was coming from the walls. Ethan stood frozen in the middle of the room, straining his ears. The sounds were growing louder now, more distinct. He moved towards the source of the noise, but as soon as he stepped closer, the whispers stopped. It was as though the house had swallowed them whole. He shook his head, trying to clear the thoughts from his mind. There had to be an explanation, right? Old houses made odd noises. Maybe there were pipes rattling, or the wind was causing the walls to creak in strange ways. But deep down, a small voice whispered to him that it was something else, something far more sinister. That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. He tossed and turned, listening to the silence that now felt suffocating. Then, just as he was drifting off, he heard it again. This time it was clearer. The words were still indecipherable, but the tone was unmistakable. It was a voice, a low, guttural sound that seemed to come from the very heart of the house. His heart raced. He was no longer imagining things. He lay there, staring at the ceiling, his breath shallow, as the whispers continued. Every so often, he would hear a footstep in the hallway or the creak of the stairs. But when he would gather the courage to get up and check, there was nothing. No one. Just the stillness. The next morning, he tried to rationalize it all. It had been a long, stressful day of moving in. Maybe he was just exhausted. Maybe his mind was playing tricks on him. But the more he thought about it, the more certain he became that something was wrong with this place. Something beyond his understanding. Ethan decided to explore the house further. Maybe, he thought, if he found out more about its history, he could make sense of the strange occurrences. The realtor had given him a vague outline, but there was a lot of missing information. No one seemed to know exactly what had happened to the previous owners. The house was larger than he had realized, with many rooms that led off of narrow, dimly lit hallway. As he walked through the rooms, he noticed strange markings on the walls, faint scratches that seemed out of place, as though something had clawed at the surfaces. In one of the rooms, a dusty mirror stood against the wall, its surface so tarnished that it was almost impossible to see your reflection. But Ethan couldn't look away. Something about it unnerved him. His eyes scanned the room, and that's when he saw it, just for a split second. A shadow darted across the corner of the mirror. It was quick, almost imperceptible, but Ethan swore he saw it. A figure, person? No, it couldn't be. He quickly turned to face the room, but there was no one there. His skin prickled with unease as he backed away from the mirror. He glanced at the clock. It was nearly time for dinner, and he needed to shake this off. The house was getting to him, that's all. A good meal, a long shower, and a good night's sleep would clear his head. But as Ethan made his way back to the kitchen, he heard it again, the whisper. This time they were louder, more urgent. They seemed to come from everywhere at once, as though the house itself were speaking to him. He stopped in his tracks, his stomach knotting. His heart pounded in his chest. He spun around, half expecting someone to be there, but the hallway was empty. Still, the whispers continued. They were getting closer, as if something was moving toward him. "Who's there?" Ethan's voice was trembling, but he couldn't stop himself from asking. Silence answered him. Then, the temperature in the hallway dropped. It was sudden, sharp, a cold that bit into his skin like 1,000 needles. His breath fogged in the air, and for the first time, Ethan felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather outside. The whispers stopped, and then a door slammed somewhere deep in the house. Ethan's eyes widened in terror. The house was alive. It was as though it had a mind of its own, one that was watching him, waiting for him to make the wrong move. His hands trembled as he reached for his phone, but as he unlocked the screen, the device flickered and died. No signal, no way to call for help. It was just him and the house now. The whispers had returned. Whispering Shadows, Chapter 2. Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that the house was watching him. It was as though the walls themselves were alive, breathing in rhythm with him. The silence was overwhelming now, a heavy, suffocating quiet that pressed down on him from every side. He had turned off all the lights and locked the doors, yet there was an unsettling sensation that no matter what he did, he wasn't alone. The door to the room where the mirror stood creaked again. Ethan could feel it, the weight of something moving just behind him, just out of sight. His breath hitched as he turned toward the room, but it was empty. The floorboards groaned beneath his feet, but that wasn't unusual in a house this old. What unsettled him, though, was the distinct smell of something rotting, the kind of odor that clung to your clothes and lingered in your nostril. He moved into the kitchen, hoping the act of preparing a meal would distract him, calm his nerves. The cold air had disappeared, but his skin still tingled, as if it were reacting to something unseen. The oven clicked on as he opened it, the smell of burnt metal filling the room. As he began to move about the kitchen, he heard the whispering again, this time more intense, more frantic, as though the voice was struggling to be heard. The sound was coming from upstairs. Without thinking, Ethan grabbed the flashlight from a drawer and made his way to the stairs. Each step creaked under his weight, but he didn't stop. He couldn't stop. There was something up there, something that needed to be found, something that, for some reason, he had to understand. As he reached the top of the stairs, the temperature dropped again. His breath fogged in front of him, and a sense of dread washed over him. The hallway stretched before him, its walls lined with dusty portraits that seemed to watch him with hollow eyes. The whispers were louder now, echoing off the walls. They were not in any language Ethan could understand, but they were there, insistent, demanding, like a crowd murmuring just beyond his reach. He stood still, his heart racing in his chest. The voices seemed to call his name. Ethan. The sound was unmistakable, coming from the end of the hall. His name, whispered softly, as if someone knew him intimately. The hairs on the back of his neck stood on end as he felt the overwhelming urge to turn and leave, to run far from this house, from this place. But something held him there, tethered to the floor. "Who's there?" he called out, his voice trembling despite himself. The silence that followed was suffocating, and he felt the weight of it pressing down on him, trying to force him into submission. He took a step forward, and the whispers grew louder. This time, they were not just whispers. They were words, sharp and clear. "Come closer." Against every instinct telling him to retreat, Ethan moved forward, his feet heavy with each step. The hallway was longer than it had seemed, the shadows stretching in ways that didn't make sense. As he neared the last door at the end of the hall, the temperature dropped again. The door was slightly ajar, as if it were waiting for him. Ethan pushed the door open, the old wood groaning under his touch. What he saw inside made his blood run cold. The room was small, no larger than a closet, and completely empty except for a single chair in the middle of the room. It was an old wooden chair with intricate carvings on the back. The kind of chair you'd see in a museum, not in a room like this. But what caught Ethan's attention wasn't the chair, it was what was on the floor. There, in the middle of the room, were faint, muddy footprints leading from the door to the chair. They were fresh, as if someone had just walked in. The strange part was the prints didn't belong to anyone. They were wrong. The size and shape were off, like they had been made by something that wasn't human. His breath caught in his throat, and for a moment, all he could do was stare. The air was thick with an invisible pressure, pushing him back, urging him to leave. But he couldn't. His feet were rooted to the floor, his body frozen in place as the whispers grew louder, echoing around him in the small room. "Sit in the chair," they whispered, the voice now clear and unmistakable. Ethan shook his head, trying to gather his thoughts. This wasn't real. This was just his mind playing tricks on him. It had to be. He backed away slowly, his body trembling. The whispers followed him, growing louder with each step he took, their voices echoing in his ears. But no matter how far he backed away, they didn't stop. "Sit in the chair," they repeated, growing more insistent. "You must sit in the chair." With a sudden burst of energy, Ethan turned and ran, slamming the door behind him. He stumbled down the hallway, his heart racing as he rushed to get away from the room, from the whispers, from the house itself. But no matter how fast he ran, the sounds followed him, never letting up. He reached the stairs and descended them in a blur, nearly tripping over his feet. The whispers were relentless now, rising to a deafening crescendo. But just as he thought he would lose his mind, the noise suddenly stopped. The silence returned. Ethan stood in the living room, gasping for breath, his hands shaking as he tried to regain his composure. He could hear his pulse thundering in his ears, and for the first time, he wondered if he had made a grave mistake by staying in this house. He glanced around, his eyes darting over every shadow, every corner of the room. He needed to leave, but something told him that no matter where he went, the house would follow. The whispers would follow, and the chair would still be waiting. The night stretched on, heavy and suffocating, like the house itself was holding him captive. Ethan couldn't escape the feeling that the walls were closing in, tightening around him with every passing second. The oppressive silence that followed the whispers had only deepened the sense of dread in his chest. Every creak, every groan of the house seemed to echo louder now, filling the space with a constant reminder that he was not alone. He knew he had to leave. The air in the house felt thick, like it was coated in something unclean, something dark. But every time he reached for the door, he felt a pull, a heavy weight that kept him inside. It wasn't the house keeping him, but something within it, something that didn't want him to go. Ethan tried to ignore the gnawing feeling in his gut, tried to shake off the whispers that had followed him into every room. He had heard them again, late at night, just before he had drifted into a fitful sleep. They weren't as faint as before. They weren't whispers anymore. They were voices, low and murmuring, like a conversation happening just behind his ear. He couldn't make out the words, but he could feel them, feel the weight of them pressing against his mind. He had told himself it was just his imagination. After all, the house was old. The plumbing, the pipes, the floorboards, they creaked and moaned. It was natural to hear things in a house like this. But deep down, Ethan knew it was more than that. He couldn't explain it, but something was wrong. Something was terribly wrong. As he wandered through the house again, he found himself drawn back to the room with the chair. He stood at the threshold, hesitant to step inside, but the pull was irresistible. The whispers had started again, faint at first, but growing louder, urging him forward. The door creaked as it swung open, and Ethan stepped inside. The room looked different now. The air was colder, and the shadows seemed deeper, darker. The chair sat in the middle of the room, just as it had been before, but this time the muddy footprints were gone. There was no trace of the strange marks that had been on the floor earlier. Everything looked normal, but Ethan knew better. He knew it was a trick. He took a step forward, his heart pounding. The chair seemed to beckon him, its old wood creaking in the silence. He could hear the whispers, clearer now, though still indecipherable. They sounded almost soothing, like they were calling him to rest, to stop running, to sit and listen. Something in him broke. He couldn't take it anymore. The house had already consumed his thoughts, twisting them, pulling him deeper into its grip. He had to sit in the chair. He had to give in. Slowly, he walked across the room and lowered himself into the chair. The moment he did, the temperature in the room plummeted. His breath fogged in the air as if he were sitting in the middle of a frozen tundra. But it wasn't the cold that froze him in place. It was the sensation that washed over him, a heavy, suffocating presence that seemed to envelop him. The whispers were no longer faint. They were loud, swirling around him, their words growing clearer. They weren't comforting. They weren't soothing. They were demanding, angry. It was as if the voices were inside his mind, clawing their way through his thoughts. "Stay," the voice whispered. "Stay forever." Ethan felt his body grow heavier, as though the chair itself was pulling him down into the floor. His limbs were stiff, his chest tight. He couldn't move, couldn't even breathe properly. The whispers were all around him now, coming from every direction. It felt as if they were coming from within the walls themselves, from the very foundation of the house. "Let us in," the voice hissed, the words sharp and brittle. "Let us take you." His pulse raced in his throat, the fear thick in his chest. He wanted to scream, to jump up and run, but his body wouldn't respond. It felt as though the house itself was holding him in place, a force far stronger than anything he had ever experienced. He could feel something tugging at the edges of his mind, a darkness spreading like ink in water. And then, for a moment, everything went silent. The weight on his chest lifted, and Ethan gasped for air, his lungs burning with the need for oxygen. The fog around him cleared, and the whispers faded. The room was quiet again, too quiet. His mind reeled, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Was it real? Was it just his mind playing tricks on him? But as he sat there, gasping for breath, he noticed something in the corner of his vision. There, just in the shadows, was a figure. It was standing just out of the reach of the light, barely visible, but Ethan could feel it. He could feel its eyes on him, cold and unblinking. The figure was tall, its form obscured by the darkness, but its presence was undeniable. It wasn't human, couldn't be. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up as the figure took a step forward. Ethan froze, unable to move, unable to speak. The figure's form shifted, twisting in ways that didn't make sense. It seemed to melt in and out of the shadows, its movements fluid and unnatural. Then the figure spoke. "You shouldn't have sat in the chair," it said, its voice low and gravelly, like a distant whisper carried on the wind. Ethan's heart stopped. His body trembled, but he couldn't tear his eyes away. He wanted to scream, to run, but his voice was lost in the pit of his stomach. The figure stepped forward again, its long, twisted limbs stretching out from the darkness, reaching for him. "Now you are ours," it whispered. With a sudden, terrifying force, the figure lunged at him. Ethan's body jerked in the chair, and for the first time, his legs responded. He pushed himself out of the chair, stumbling backward as the figure's shadow lunged toward him. His feet hit the floor hard, and he fell, but he didn't stop. He scrambled to his feet and ran, his heart pounding in his chest, his breaths ragged and desperate. He made it to the door, but just as his hand grasped the doorknob, the whispers began again, louder, more frantic, more desperate. "Come back," they cried, their voices pleading now. "Come back to us." Ethan didn't hesitate. He wrenched the door open and ran down the hall, out into the living room and toward the front door. His mind raced, his body moving on pure instinct as the whispers followed him. He slammed the door open, the night air hitting him like a slap in the face. He didn't look back, but as he stood there, in the cold night, gasping for air, one thought echoed in his mind. The house wasn't done with him. The cold night air hit Ethan's skin like a sharp blade, but it did little to shake the overwhelming dread that clung to him. He stood outside the house, his legs trembling beneath him, the ground unsteady as if the earth itself was reacting to the presence inside the house. His breath came in short, panicked bursts, fogging up in front of him as he turned to look at the house one last time. The front door, which he had slammed shut just moments ago, was wide open. The shadows inside seemed deeper, darker, as though something were moving just out of sight. The wind howled through the trees, but it felt unnatural, a twisted echo that seemed to call him back. For a moment, Ethan thought about leaving, about running far away from this cursed place. But deep down, he knew he couldn't. The house had already claimed him. It had marked him. He could feel it in his bones, a cold, unshakable truth that gripped his heart. He heard the whispers again, louder now, no longer a faint murmur, but clear, as if they were standing right behind him, breathing down his neck. He turned sharply, expecting to see something, someone, but there was nothing. Only the empty, chilling night, stretching endlessly before him. "Come back," they called, their voices almost soothing now, like the soft murmur of a lullaby. "You're not free." Ethan stumbled back a step, his mind racing. He didn't want to go back inside. He didn't want to face whatever was waiting for him in that house, but the pull was too strong. He could feel it, like invisible hands reaching out, pulling him toward the door. He didn't realize he was walking back toward it until his feet were already on the steps. It was like he was in a trance, his body moving without his consent, his mind too fogged with fear and confusion to do anything about it. The whispers grew louder with every step he took. "Don't fight it," they whispered. "You belong to us." The door loomed in front of him, open and inviting. His heart pounded in his chest as he reached out, almost on instinct, to close it. But as his hand touched the doorknob, something inside the house screamed, a guttural, inhuman sound that tore through the silence of the night. Ethan recoiled, his hand jerking back as if burned. It wasn't the house calling him back. It was something else. "Get out!" the voice hissed, as sharp as a knife. "It's too late." But the warning was too little, too late. Ethan knew what he had to do. He had already made his choice, and there was no turning back now. With one last shuddering breath, he pushed the door open fully and stepped inside. The house was different this time. The air was thick with a cold that burned as it crept into his lungs, wrapping itself around his insides, freezing him from the inside out. The floor creaked beneath his feet, the very walls groaning as though they were alive, reacting to his presence. The whispers had stopped, replaced by a deep, unsettling silence that made the air feel even heavier. But there was something else now. A sound, a soft, rhythmic tapping, came from upstairs. Without thinking, Ethan began to move toward the stairs, each step more reluctant than the last. The tapping grew louder with every step he took, a slow, methodical sound, like fingers tapping on wood. He reached the top of the stairs and turned down the hallway. The portraits on the walls seemed to watch him with eyes that gleamed in the faint moonlight, their gazes unblinking. The tapping led him to the room with the chair, the room where it had all started. The door was slightly ajar, just like it had been before. Ethan's breath caught in his throat as he pushed the door open. His heart skipped a beat as his eyes landed on the chair. But it wasn't empty. Sitting in the chair, facing the door, was a figure, a tall, thin silhouette draped in shadows. The figure was motionless, its face obscured by darkness. Ethan's stomach twisted into knots as he stepped closer, his body screaming at him to run, to leave this place behind. But the pull was too strong, like a magnet drawing him in. The tapping stopped. The room was deathly still. "Why are you here?" a voice asked, low and guttural, like the scraping of nails on stone. "Don't you know what you've become?" Ethan froze, unable to speak. He wanted to scream, to demand answers, but his voice was lost in the fog of terror that enveloped him. He stepped forward, his legs weak, trembling as if they might give way beneath him at any moment. As he got closer, the figure in the chair turned its head toward him, slowly, deliberately. Its face was pale, gaunt, and hollow-eyed, like a corpse that had been left to rot for years. Its mouth stretched into a twisted, sickening smile. "You shouldn't have come back," it whispered, its voice harsh and strained. "Now you belong to us, just like the others." Ethan's heart raced. He couldn't move. He couldn't speak. The room seemed to shrink around him, closing in with an almost suffocating pressure. The figure stood, its long, twisted limbs unfolding like something unnatural, something that didn't belong. "You will never leave," the figure hissed, its eyes burning with an unnatural light. "You will never escape." Ethan backed away slowly, his breath coming in panicked gasps. He couldn't think, couldn't reason. He just had to get out. But as he turned to run, the door slammed shut with a deafening crash. The whispers returned, this time louder than ever. They filled the room, the house, his mind. They were no longer distant sounds but voices that screamed inside his head, demanding, pleading, "You are ours." And just like that, Ethan knew. It wasn't the house that had called him back. It was the shadows, the dark things that lived within the walls, within the very foundation of this place. They had been waiting, watching, and now they had him. They would never let him go. And as the whispers swirled around him, he knew there was only one thing left to do. Ethan sat down in the chair. The Cursed Highway, Chapter 1. The sun had just dipped below the horizon, leaving behind a fading crimson sky that bled into the deepening shadows of the night. The road stretched out before Jack, a seemingly endless ribbon of asphalt that wound through the desolate countryside. He had been driving for hours, the monotonous hum of the engine lulling him into a daze. The world around him felt like it was slipping away, fading into the edges of the night, where the unknown lurked just beyond the reach of his headlights. He glanced at the GPS on his dashboard, the screen flickering weakly, a reminder of how far he was from civilization. His next stop was still miles away, but the isolation was starting to get to him. This stretch of highway had always given him a strange feeling. It was known as the Cursed Highway, a name that locals whispered about in hushed tones. But Jack had never believed in superstition. He was a man of reason, of logic, not one to fall for ghost stories and rumors. But there was something unsettling about the place. The further he drove, the heavier the air seemed to get. The trees lining the road loomed like dark sentinels, their branches stretching out toward him as if reaching for his car. The wind howled through the gaps in the trees, a mournful sound that seemed to follow him. And yet, there was no one on the road, no other cars, no signs of life. It wasn't until the radio crackled to life that Jack's nerves truly began to unravel. At first, it was just static, an annoying hiss that filled the silence. But then, through the static, he heard it. A voice. It was faint at first, a whisper just on the edge of his hearing, but it was there, unmistakable. "Turn back." The words were barely audible, lost in the crackle of the radio. Jack's grip tightened on the steering wheel as he glanced around, half expecting to see someone standing by the side of the road. But there was no one, only the endless stretch of highway and the oppressive darkness. He scoffed, shaking his head. "It's just interference," he muttered to himself, trying to dismiss the strange feeling creeping up his spine. "Get a grip, Jack." But as the voice faded, another one replaced it, clearer this time, more urgent. "Turn back before it's too late." Jack's heart skipped a beat. He reached over and fiddled with the radio, trying to turn it off, but the static only grew louder. The voice was becoming clearer, more insistent. "Turn back, Jack. You've been warned." His breath hitched in his throat. How did it know his name? He glanced at the dashboard, trying to ignore the creeping sense of unease that was taking over his thoughts. The GPS screen had gone black, flickering for a moment before completely shutting down. He slammed his palm against it, but it was useless. The screen remained dark. "Great," he muttered. Of course, this would happen out here. His headlights illuminated something ahead, something that made his stomach tighten. A figure was standing in the middle of the road, blocking his path. At first, he thought it might be a person, but as he got closer, the figure became more distorted, more unnatural. It was too still, too rigid. He slammed on the brakes, the tires screeching against the asphalt, but the figure didn't move. It was as if it was frozen in time, unmoving, unblinking. Jack's pulse raced, his heart pounding in his chest as he stared at the figure. The moment he stopped, everything went eerily quiet. The wind, the rustling trees, even the hum of the engine. All of it stopped, leaving behind a silence that was almost suffocating. His mind raced as he tried to make sense of what he was seeing. The figure was tall, unnaturally so, and seemed to be draped in some kind of shadowy cloak that billowed unervingly despite the lack of wind. Its face was hidden beneath a hood, but Jack could feel its eyes on him, piercing, burning with an intensity that made his blood run cold. He didn't know what to do. Every instinct told him to drive away, to turn around and flee, but he couldn't move. He was frozen, caught in some kind of trance, unable to look away from the figure in the road. The seconds stretched on, and in the silence, the voice returned. "You shouldn't have come." The voice was clear now, not from the radio, but from the figure. It was low, gravelly, like it had been pulled from the depths of something ancient and forgotten. Jack's body went cold with fear, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that his knuckles turned white. "Leave now," the figure said, its voice becoming darker, more threatening. "Before it's too late." With a sudden jolt, Jack snapped out of his daze. His foot slammed on the gas pedal, and the car lurched forward, the tires screeching as they sped down the highway. He didn't look back. He couldn't. The sound of his heartbeat filled his ears, drowning out everything else. As he tore down the road, his mind raced. The figure, the voice, the warnings, it was all too much. But when he looked in the rearview mirror, his blood ran cold. The figure was there, standing in the middle of the road, watching him as he sped away. And as he drove faster, the figure didn't disappear. It stayed, a shadow in the distance, its eyes never leaving him. Jack's hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles were beginning to ache, but he couldn't bring himself to let go. His mind raced, his heart hammering in his chest as he pushed the car faster down the desolate road. The figure was still behind him. In the rearview mirror, he could see it, standing motionless in the middle of the highway, watching him like a predator waiting for its prey to make a mistake. The car's headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating the stretch of road ahead, but no matter how fast he drove, it felt as if the figure was gaining on him. Every turn, every curve in the road seemed to stretch endlessly, as if the highway itself was conspiring against him, pulling him deeper into the unknown. The radio crackled again, the static deafening in the otherwise silent car. Jack jumped, his heart skipping a beat as the voice emerged once more, low and guttural, seeping into the air like a cold fog. "You can't escape." The voice was almost a whisper, but it felt as though it was echoing in his mind, reverberating in the very core of his being. His breath caught in his throat as the words settled over him like a heavy blanket. He glanced nervously at the rearview mirror once more. The figure was still there, its shadowy form standing impossibly still on the road. But now something was different. It seemed closer. Its presence felt as if it were pressing against him, suffocating him with an unseen weight. "No, no, no," Jack muttered under his breath, his foot pressing harder on the accelerator. The speedometer climbed, but the darkness seemed to stretch on forever, the road never ending. No sign of another car, no indication of civilization. Just the relentless stretch of highway and the oppressive silence. A sudden thud against the side of the car made Jack jerk, his breath coming out in a sharp gasp. He instinctively swerved, the tires screeching as the car veered off course for a split second before he regained control. His heart raced, pounding in his chest like a drum. "What the hell was that?" he hissed through clenched teeth. He didn't dare look at the passenger side of the car. He couldn't. He didn't want to know what might be there. Instead, he focused all his attention on the road, pushing the car to its limits, hoping that somehow this would end. He prayed for a sign of life, another car, a house, anything to pull him out of this nightmare. But the highway was as empty as ever. The eerie quiet settled over him once more, broken only by the sound of his ragged breathing and the tires against the asphalt. The radio was silent now, the static replaced by a strange, humming sound, like a low vibration that seemed to seep into his bones. Suddenly, the GPS on the dashboard flickered back to life, the screen lighting up with a dull glow. Jack's eyes shot to it in confusion. The map was showing the road ahead, but it was no longer the familiar highway. The path had changed, twisting into an unfamiliar, jagged route that led into a dark, shadowy forest. He slammed on the brakes, the car jolting to a sudden stop. "No way," Jack whispered, panic creeping into his voice. "This isn't right." The road on the GPS continued to change, the path winding and weaving through the dense trees that seemed to stretch endlessly into the blackness. There were no markers, no signs, nothing to indicate where he was, or if this road even existed. Just the endless forest, closing in on him from all sides. The vibration in the car grew stronger, and Jack's stomach churned. The low hum, now almost a growl, filled the car, vibrating through the steering wheel, the seats, the very air he breathed. He felt it in his bones, a sensation that gnawed at his sanity. Then, just as quickly as it had started, the sound stopped. The stillness that followed was suffocating. The road ahead was now completely dark, the headlights failing to pierce the thick blackness that surrounded him. Jack's thoughts were spinning, his mind racing in all directions. He was lost, utterly lost. The road no longer made sense. The GPS was showing places he had never seen, places that shouldn't exist. The world around him felt wrong, unnatural, as if he was no longer in the real world, but trapped in something that was twisted, something far worse. Then came the tapping again. It was faint at first, a barely perceptible sound from the outside of the car, but soon it grew louder, rapid, rhythmic tapping, as if something or someone was tapping on the windows, its nails scraping against the glass. Jack's blood ran cold. He didn't dare look, couldn't bring himself to even glance at the side mirror. He gripped the steering wheel harder, his hands slick with sweat, his heart racing faster than ever. The tapping continued, growing louder, closer. Jack's breath quickened, his throat tightening as he stared at the road ahead, the darkness pressing in from all sides. Suddenly, there was a loud bang, the sound of something heavy hitting the side of the car. Jack's head whipped to the right, and to his horror, he saw a face pressed against the window, a face pale and distorted, twisted in agony. It was a man, his eyes wide with terror, his mouth open in a silent scream. Jack slammed his foot on the gas pedal, the car lurching forward. His heart was in his throat as he swerved violently, narrowly missing a tree. His breath came in short, desperate gasps as he struggled to maintain control. But the face, it didn't disappear. It stayed there, staring at him, haunting him from the outside of the car. The tapping resumed, louder than ever, echoing in his mind, in his ears. The whispers returned too. They were soft at first, but now they were overwhelming. They filled the car, the air, his thoughts. "You should never have come." Jack's blood ran cold as the voice echoed in his mind. He couldn't escape, no matter how fast he drove, no matter how hard he tried to outrun it. He couldn't shake the feeling that something far worse than a simple ghost story was waiting for him at the end of this highway. As the car sped deeper into the night, Jack realized he wasn't alone on this road, and whatever it was that had been watching him, whispering to him, was getting closer, much closer. The sound of the tires on the road became a faint hum beneath the deafening silence, broken only by Jack's ragged breaths. His hands shook on the steering wheel, the grip so tight his fingers felt like they might cramp. The pale face from the window, the tapping, the whispers, they were all real, more real than anything he had ever encountered. He glanced at the rearview mirror again, but there was nothing there. No face, no shadows, just the empty darkness stretching endlessly behind him. But Jack knew better than to trust what he saw, or rather, what he didn't see. His heart pounded as his foot pressed harder on the gas pedal. He needed to get out of here, needed to find a way off this cursed highway before whatever was following him could catch up. The road seemed to stretch on forever, winding through trees that were now growing denser, their gnarled branches reaching toward the car like skeletal hands. The headlights barely cut through the dark, leaving only small pools of light in their wake, illuminating nothing but more of the same empty, desolate road. There was no end in sight, no sign of life, no hope. The silence was maddening, the kind of silence that makes you question whether you're truly alone, or if something unseen is lurking just beyond the edge of your vision, watching, waiting. Suddenly, the radio crackled back to life, the same low hum filling the car. Jack's pulse quickened, and he instinctively reached for the dial, desperate to turn it off, to break the eerie quiet. But it wasn't just static this time. The voice was back, louder, clearer, as if it had been waiting for him to listen. "You're too far in now," it said, its tone cold, mocking. "You can't leave. You belong to us." Jack's blood ran cold. His hands trembled as he slammed his palm against the radio, but it didn't stop. The voice continued, seeping into his ears like poison. "You've been warned. The highway claims everyone who drives it. And now it's your turn." His breath caught in his throat. He had heard the stories, of course. The ones people whispered about the cursed highway, the disappearances, the strange accidents that seemed to happen out of nowhere. But he never believed them. Never thought for a second that something like this could happen to him. He was a man of reason, of science. But all of that was slipping away now, replaced by an overwhelming sense of dread. The face, the tapping, the voice, they weren't just hallucinations. They were real. And whatever was haunting this road, whatever force was behind the whispers and the shadows, was closing in on him, tightening its grip. The headlights flickered, casting long shadows across the trees that lined the road. For a moment, Jack thought he saw something move in the darkness, something large and dark that shifted just beyond the trees. His breath hitched in his throat as his gaze snapped toward it, but there was nothing there when he looked again. Just more trees, more darkness. The tapping returned, louder this time, coming from the roof of the car. Jack froze, his hand hovering over the steering wheel. His mind screamed at him to pull over, to get out of the car and run, but his body refused to obey. The tapping continued, like nails scratching against metal, relentless and terrifying. Without warning, the car swerved, jerking to the side as if something had shoved it off course. Jack's heart skipped a beat as he fought to regain control, his hands yanking the steering wheel in the opposite direction. The car slid dangerously, fishtailing along the slick road before finally righting itself. He slammed on the brakes, his heart in his throat, and the car screeched to a stop. The engine sputtered, struggling for a moment before the low hum of the motor died completely. The headlights went out, plunging him into an inky blackness so thick it felt suffocating. Jack's breath came in ragged gasps as his eyes darted around, searching for any sign of movement, any hint of life. But there was nothing, only the silence and the darkness. His pulse raced as he reached for the door handle, his fingers shaking uncontrollably. His mind screamed at him to get out, to run, but his body was paralyzed, frozen in place. He couldn't move. The car was his only refuge now, and even that didn't feel safe. Then the sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, echoing in the empty space outside the car. Jack's breath caught in his throat. The footsteps were too close, too real. He glanced at the rearview mirror, his heart pounding in his chest as he prayed he wouldn't see the face again. But this time, the mirror was different. It was warped, distorted, like the glass was no longer reflecting reality. And in the warped reflection, Jack saw it, a figure standing just behind the car, tall and unnaturally still. Its face was obscured, hidden beneath a dark hood. But Jack knew, deep down, that it was the same thing that had been following him. It was here, it was close, and there was no way out. The footsteps grew louder, the sound of them closing in on the car with terrifying speed. Jack's panic reached a boiling point. His hands fumbled for the door handle, but just as he was about to yank it open, a voice, cold and calm, whispered in his ear from the back seat. "You can't leave. Not now. Not ever." Jack's breath caught in his throat. The voice was right there, as if the thing, whatever it was sitting in the car with him. He could feel its presence, the weight of it pressing against him from every side. It was suffocating, drowning him in its darkness. Without thinking, Jack threw the car into gear, slamming his foot on the gas pedal. The engine roared to life, the headlights flickering back on as the car shot forward, tearing down the highway at breakneck speed. He didn't know where he was going. He didn't care. He just needed to get away. But the road seemed to stretch on forever, twisting and turning, leading him deeper into the heart of the cursed highway. And with every mile, the sense of something watching him, following him, grew stronger. The tapping on the car returned, this time coming from all sides, windows, the roof, the hood. Jack's mind was spiraling into madness, his hands shaking so violently he could barely keep the car on the road. He glanced in the rearview mirror again, and this time, the face was there, pale, twisted, its eyes wide open, staring directly at him. "Turn back," the voice whispered, but this time, Jack knew there was no turning back. Not anymore. The engine roared in protest as Jack's foot pressed harder on the gas pedal, the car hurtling down the cursed highway with no end in sight. His grip on the wheel was white-knuckled, his entire body tense with fear. The tapping continued, relentless and maddening, echoing from all around him. It wasn't just on the car anymore. It was in the air, in his ears, in his very mind. Every tap felt like it was driving him further into insanity, pulling him deeper into the nightmarish grip of the highway. Jack's eyes darted nervously to the rearview mirror, but the face, the twisted, pale face, was gone. It had vanished just like the tapping had at times, only to return when he least expected it. But even in the absence of the face, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't alone. The presence was there, all around him, suffocating him with its cold, oppressive weight. His breath came in shallow gasps, each exhale more ragged than the last. He had to get off this road. He had to find a way out. The stories he had heard about the cursed highway, about the souls lost here, the disappearances, the twisted fate of those who dared to drive through, were becoming all too real. He could feel the truth creeping up on him, like a dark shadow just behind his every movement. The road stretched on endlessly, curving and winding through the thick trees. The darkness around him was absolute, a void that seemed to suck the light from the headlights, leaving him with only a narrow path of dim illumination ahead. The trees on either side were no longer just trees. They had become twisted, gnarled shapes, their branches like outstretched hands, clawing at the air. The shadows between them seemed to shift, as if something was moving just beyond his sight. Jack's mind raced, trying to make sense of what was happening. How could this be real? How could a road, a highway, hold such power? He had never been a superstitious man. He had always dismissed these kinds of things as mere stories, myths, legends, folklore. But this was beyond anything he could understand. Suddenly, the tapping stopped. A strange silence settled over the car. For a moment, Jack almost dared to believe it was over, that the nightmare was ending. But deep down, he knew it wasn't. He knew that the silence was just the calm before the storm. And then, without warning, the radio crackled to life again. The static was deafening, like the hiss of 1,000 angry bees buzzing in his ears. His pulse quickened, and before he could reach for the dial, the voice returned. "You think you can escape?" The voice rasped, cold and mocking. "You've made a deal. You belong to the highway now. There is no leaving." Jack froze, the blood draining from his face. His eyes snapped to the rearview mirror again, but this time, there was something new. A shadow was moving behind him, growing larger with every passing second. It was too large to be human, too wrong. The shape was twisted, shifting, its form warping in ways that defied logic. The whisper came again, louder now, as though it were in the very car with him. "You should have turned back. Now you'll never leave. None of us ever do." Jack's heart hammered in his chest as the shadow in the mirror grew closer, until it was all he could see, a dark, formless mass pressing in from all sides. He slammed his foot on the gas pedal, but the car didn't speed up. It was as though the road itself was pulling him back, refusing to let him leave. He glanced out the side window, and his blood ran cold. A figure was standing on the side of the road, just outside the reach of the headlight. It was a man, tall and gaunt, his face obscured by a hood. But Jack could feel his eyes, feel the cold, piercing stare even from a distance. Without thinking, Jack yanked the wheel to the side, swerving the car violently to avoid hitting the figure. The tires screamed against the asphalt, the car fishtailing as it slid sideways. The world spun around him, and for a terrifying moment, he thought he might lose control entirely. But somehow, he managed to right the car, just as the headlights illuminated the dark figure standing in the road. It wasn't a man. The figure was distorted, its body twisted in unnatural angles. Its limbs were too long, too thin, like a marionette controlled by invisible strings. And its face, God, the face was an abomination. It was a patchwork of human features, twisted and stitched together, like something that had been thrown together in a nightmare. Its eyes were wide and empty, staring into Jack's soul as if it knew everything he had ever done. The car roared back to life, and Jack slammed his foot on the gas again. The figure remained still, watching as the car tore past it, leaving it behind. But Jack knew it wasn't gone. The thing wasn't something that could be outrun. He didn't dare look in the rearview mirror this time. He couldn't. But the road ahead was still the same, endless, dark, stretching forward into infinity. The trees on either side had become twisted, their branches now resembling clawed hands, reaching for him as if to drag him into the forest. He gritted his teeth, his mind racing. He had to find a way off this road. He had to escape. As the road continued to curve, Jack caught a glimpse of something ahead, a faint light in the distance. A sign. It was small, almost indistinguishable in the dark, but it was there, a beacon of hope. He didn't hesitate. He pressed the gas pedal harder, his eyes locked on the light ahead. Could be his way out. It had to be. But as the car neared the light, something shifted. The sign wasn't a sign at all. It was a gate, a large, rusted iron gate that stretched across the road, its bars twisted and bent, as if they had been there for centuries. The gate stood tall and imposing, an unholy barrier that blocked his way. Jack's heart sank as he slammed on the brakes, the car screeching to a halt just inches from the rusted gate. He stared at it, his mind racing. How could this be? How could there be a gate here? It hadn't been there before. A chill ran down his spine as he looked up from the gate to the twisted trees beyond. And that's when he saw it, the figure again. The hooded figure, standing just behind the gate, watching him with those cold, empty eyes. "You should have turned back when you had the chance," the voice whispered again, this time from inside the car. "Now you will join us." Jack's breath caught in his throat as the gate slowly creaked open, the rusted metal groaning as if it were alive, welcoming him into the darkness. The highway had claimed him. The Silent Woods, Chapter 1. It was a cold evening when Marcus drove into the depths of the forest. He had heard about these woods, how the locals whispered of strange occurrences, of disappearances, of the unnerving quiet that seemed to swallow every sound. But Marcus had never been one to believe in ghost stories or the supernatural. He had always dismissed these things as mere superstition. That is, until now. He had taken a wrong turn, he thought. His GPS had failed him, and the familiar roads had disappeared behind him. Now he was alone, driving deeper into the forest, the world outside swallowed by the dense trees that surrounded him. He felt a strange unease settle in his stomach, a quiet discomfort that seemed to grow with every mile. The headlights of his car cut through the darkness, but they only revealed a small patch of road ahead. The trees loomed on either side, their branches twisted and reaching toward him, as though they were trying to grab hold of the car, to pull it into the woods. He shook his head, trying to push the thought away. It was just his imagination. As he drove on, he noticed how quiet it was. Too quiet. The usual sounds of the night, chirping crickets, rustling leaves, were missing. It was as if the forest was holding its breath. His car engine hummed in the silence, the only sound breaking the eerie stillness. He tried to rationalize it. There were no animals in the area. Perhaps the weather had driven them deeper into the forest. But the silence felt unnatural, like something was watching him, waiting for him to make the wrong move. Marcus pulled over to the side of the road, his headlights casting long shadows on the trees. He checked his phone for a signal, but there was nothing. No bars, no Wi-Fi. He was completely cut off from the outside world. He cursed under his breath, realizing how foolish he had been to ignore the warnings of the locals. He should have turned back hours ago. But now it was too late. He was here and he had to keep moving. He started the car again, his hands gripping the steering wheel tightly as he slowly eased the car forward. The trees seemed to close in around him as he drove deeper into the heart of the forest. The road ahead twisted and turned, and with each bend, the darkness seemed to grow heavier. Then, out of nowhere, something appeared on the side of the road. A figure, a person, standing motionless in the shadows, just at the edge of the trees. Marcus's heart skipped a beat, and for a moment, he wondered if he was imagining it. He rubbed his eyes, trying to clear the fog in his mind. But when he looked again, the figure was still there. A chill ran down his spine as he slowed the car, his eyes locked on the figure. It was a man, tall and thin, dressed in dark clothes. His face was hidden by a hood, his body unnaturally still. The man didn't move, didn't acknowledge Marcus's presence, but Marcus could feel the weight of his gaze, even from this distance. For a brief moment, Marcus considered stopping, asking the stranger for directions. But the cold, unsettling feeling in his gut stopped him. There was something off about the way the man stood there, motionless, lifeless, as if he had been there for years, waiting. Marcus pressed his foot down on the gas, his eyes not leaving the figure as he drove past. As he sped away, he stole one last glance in the rearview mirror. The figure was still there, standing at the edge of the trees, watching him. A loud thud startled him, followed by a scraping noise that came from underneath the car. Marcus's heart raced as he slammed on the brakes, the car screeching to a halt. For a moment, he sat frozen, his hands trembling on the steering wheel. The scraping sound continued, growing louder and more frantic, like something was dragging against the car. What the hell was that? He put the car in park and jumped out, his eyes scanning the area around him. The forest was still, silent, and he could feel the weight of the darkness pressing in on him. The scraping noise had stopped, but a sense of dread lingered in the air. He knelt down to inspect the car, half expecting to find something caught beneath it. But when he looked, there was nothing. No sign of damage, no debris, nothing that could explain the sound. His breath came in shallow gasps as he stood up, looking around one more time before getting back into the car. He didn't know what had just happened, but he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't staying out here any longer. Marcus turned the key in the ignition, but the car sputtered and died. His heart dropped. He turned it again, but the same thing happened. Panic began to rise in his chest. The silence around him felt deafening now, oppressive. His phone was still without signal, and his car was refusing to start. "Come on," he muttered to himself, his hands shaking as he turned the key once more. But this time, the car didn't even try to start. It was dead. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up, and the fear that had been creeping up on him finally broke free, rushing through him in a cold wave. He was alone. The forest was closing in around him, and he had no idea how to get out. And then, just as the last of his hope drained away, he heard it, the faint sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, coming from the woods. Marcus froze. His blood ran cold. The footsteps were getting closer. The footsteps echoed through the forest, each one like a drumbeat in the silence. Marcus stood frozen in his car, his heart racing in his chest. He couldn't see who or what was out there, but he could feel the presence growing closer, the tension thickening in the air. The footsteps grew louder, more deliberate, and the hairs on the back of his neck prickled as the dark figure neared. He looked at his phone again, praying for a signal, but it was still dead. No bars, no help. There was nothing. The isolation of the woods was suffocating, and his mind spun in a frantic loop. Who could be out there? Was it the man he had seen earlier? The one standing motionless at the edge of the trees? The footsteps stopped. The silence returned, and for a moment, Marcus thought maybe it was his imagination playing tricks on him. Maybe it was just the wind or an animal. But deep down, he knew better. Something about the stillness, the weight of it, felt wrong. It wasn't the peaceful quiet of nature. It was an oppressive silence, like the forest was holding its breath, waiting for something. Suddenly, there was a knock, a single, sharp knock on the car window. Marcus jumped back, his pulse racing. His eyes darted to the window, wide with fear. The knock came again, louder this time, followed by a low, raspy voice. "Let me in." Marcus's breath caught in his throat. The voice was cold, unnatural, like it came from the depths of some dark abyss. He couldn't see the person outside, couldn't make out any features through the glass, but he knew one thing for sure: he wasn't alone. Someone, or something, was standing outside his car, just beyond the window, waiting for him to open it. The knock came again, more insistent this time, followed by a low growl that sent a shiver down his spine. The sound didn't belong to any animal he knew. It was something else, something human and yet not. "Let me in." The voice was softer now, almost pleading, but there was a strange edge to it. A desperation that sent chills down Marcus's spine. He felt a cold sweat break out on his forehead as he stared at the window. He didn't know what to do. He couldn't stay here. He couldn't stay in the car, trapped with whatever that thing was outside. But if he opened the door, if he let it in, the growl came again, louder this time, a deep, guttural sound that seemed to reverberate through the car. Marcus's heart skipped a beat as his eyes flicked to the rearview mirror. The trees behind him were shrouded in darkness, but he could make out a shape, tall and thin, with long, spindly limbs that stretched unnaturally. The figure was moving, slowly, toward the car. The knocking stopped. For a moment, the forest was silent again, and Marcus couldn't decide whether it was a blessing or a curse. The presence outside felt suffocating, but the absence of sound was almost worse, as though something was waiting for him to make a mistake. With shaking hands, Marcus reached for the door handle. He didn't know why. His mind screamed at him not to, but something was pushing him, urging him to leave, to open the door and step into the darkness. Before he could make a decision, the voice spoke again, but this time it was inside the car, low and raspy, like it was breathing down his neck. "Don't run. You can't escape." Marcus froze, his blood running cold. He didn't know how it had gotten inside, or if it was some trick of the mind, but the voice was unmistakable. It was right there, beside him, in the car. His breath caught in his throat as he turned slowly to his right. The seat next to him was empty, but the air was thick, charged with something. A weight, like a presence, settled next to him. The coldness in the air seemed to grow, creeping in from every corner of the car, filling the space. The air became heavy, suffocating. He couldn't breathe. Every inhale felt like it might be his last. His vision blurred, and for a moment, everything seemed to tilt, like the world was spinning. "Don't leave me." The voice was softer now, almost pleading, as though it were trying to make him feel sympathy for it, to pity it. But Marcus knew better. There was no pity to be had. This wasn't a person. It wasn't even human. It was something far worse, something ancient, something born from the darkness of the woods. His hand shot to the door handle again, but before he could open it, the car lurched forward. The engine roared to life on its own, the tires screeching as they spun. Marcus slammed on the brakes in a panic, but the car continued to move, gliding forward as if it were being pulled by an invisible force. The trees outside the car window seemed to twist and bend, their shapes warping as the car sped down the narrow, winding road. The headlights flickered, casting distorted shadows on the trees. Marcus could see them now, the shapes, dark figures lurking in the forest, their eyes glowing red like embers. He wasn't alone in the woods. The trees were alive, and they were closing in on him. The car swerved violently, and Marcus fought to keep control, his hands gripping the wheel tightly. His eyes flicked to the rearview mirror again, and this time, there was no escaping it. The tall, thin figure was there, standing right behind the car, its eyes glowing with an unnatural light. Its limbs were too long, too twisted, and its face. He couldn't make it out, but he could feel its eyes on him, feel it watching him, waiting for him to stop, to give in. The road ahead was a blur, a never-ending stretch of darkness. The car was moving faster now, faster than it should, as though the forest itself was pushing him forward, urging him deeper into its grip. Suddenly, the car jerked to the side, and Marcus's stomach lurched as the headlights illuminated a figure in the middle of the road. A man, standing tall and still, his face obscured by a hood. The figure didn't move as the car came closer, didn't flinch as the headlights shone on him. Marcus slammed on the brakes, but the car didn't stop, kept moving, hurtling toward the figure. He screamed, trying to turn the wheel, but it was no use. The car was in the hands of something else now, something far more powerful than he could understand. And then the figure in the road raised a hand. The car slammed into him. The world went black. When Marcus opened his eyes, the world was nothing but darkness. He felt weightless, disoriented. The sharp, cold air bit at his skin as he tried to move, but his limbs felt heavy, as though they were encased in lead. His heart pounded in his chest, and his head throbbed with an unbearable pressure. His vision blurred as he blinked, trying to make sense of his surroundings. But there was nothing. No car, no road, just an endless, oppressive blackness that stretched out in every direction. The only thing he could hear was the pounding of his heart and the ragged, shallow breaths he was drawing. He tried to sit up, but his body refused to cooperate. His arms and legs trembled as if they hadn't moved in hours, if not longer. Panic bubbled in his chest, clawing at his throat as he fought to regain control of his body. A voice, soft, almost a whisper, slithered into his ears. "You're not alone." Marcus's breath caught in his throat, and he froze. The voice was the same one he had heard before, the one that had haunted him in the car, the one that had called out to him from the darkness, the one that had sounded so human and yet so wrong. His eyes snapped open again, and this time he saw something. A shadow. It was barely perceptible at first, just a flicker in the corner of his vision, but it moved. It was large, shifting, a twisted form that seemed to flow through the darkness like liquid. The ground beneath him felt soft, almost spongy, as though he were lying on something wet, but when he reached out to touch it, his hand met only cold, smooth stone. His fingers grazed the surface, and a jolt of electricity shot up his arm. The sensation made his skin crawl, but before he could pull away, a cold hand grabbed his wrist. "Don't run." The voice was right next to him now, and Marcus could feel the breath of whoever or whatever it was brushing against his ear. His blood ran cold as the fingers tightened around his wrist, digging into his skin with unnatural strength. Marcus twisted, struggling to free himself, but the grip held fast, unyielding. He wanted to scream, but his throat was tight, constricted, as though something was pressing down on him from all sides. He could barely breathe, and the darkness around him seemed to close in tighter with every passing second. Suddenly, the grip released, and Marcus gasped for air, his body shaking violently as he pulled himself to his knees. He looked around, his heart hammering in his chest, but he still saw nothing but blackness. The shadows that had flickered earlier were gone now, leaving only the oppressive silence. But the voice, oh, the voice, it was still there. "You shouldn't have come." The words echoed in his mind, reverberating through the dark void, and he felt them deep within his bones. The weight of them pressed down on him like a stone. He didn't know where he was or how he had gotten here, but the sensation of being watched was inescapable. It was as if the darkness itself was alive, breathing, waiting for him to make the wrong move. He had to get out. He had to find a way out. "Please," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "Help me." A low, almost melodic chuckle responded, sending chills down his spine. "Help you?" the voice said, the amusement clear in its tone. "There's no one here to help you." Marcus tried to move, to push himself up, but his legs buckled beneath him, and he collapsed back to the ground. His head spun, and the pressure in his skull grew more intense, threatening to crack him open. "Where am I?" he gasped, his voice barely audible. "What is this place?" The voice was silent for a moment, as if contemplating the question, and then it spoke again, slow and deliberate. "You're in the heart of the woods, the place where all things lost go, the place where they wait." Marcus's stomach churned. The heart of the woods? The place where things wait? "What do you want from me?" he demanded, trying to keep his voice steady, but it quivered with fear. He could feel the darkness pressing in closer, suffocating him. The laugh came again, this time louder, more mocking. "You're already here, Marcus. You've already come." Marcus's blood ran cold as the words settled into his mind. He was here, yes, but why? What had he stumbled into? The answers eluded him, but one thing was clear: he wasn't meant to leave. And just as quickly as the voice had started, it stopped. The silence that followed was suffocating, more intense than any of the sounds he had heard before. The quiet was like a weight pressing down on him from all sides. In the distance, Marcus thought he heard something else. A soft, scraping noise, like nails against stone. It was faint at first, barely audible, but it grew louder, closer. His body froze. He couldn't bring himself to turn around, to see what was coming for him, but he could feel it. Something was moving toward him through the dark, and whatever it was getting closer. A soft whisper brushed against his ear, and for the first time he felt truly terrified. The voice was no longer distant. It was right there, right next to him, just behind him. "Don't look." The voice was cold, final, and then the scraping noise stopped. He didn't listen. He couldn't stop himself. Marcus turned. A figure stood before him, its shape obscured by the blackness. It was tall, too tall, its body stretched unnaturally. Its limbs were long and thin, almost skeletal, with fingers that reached down like claws. The face, it was a twisted mask of shadows, its features warped, shifting, never staying the same. Eyes, glowing an eerie red, locked onto his, and for a moment, he saw nothing else. He couldn't move. His body was paralyzed by fear, his throat closed tight, unable to scream. The figure took a slow step forward, and then another. Its breath was ragged, like it hadn't breathed in years, like it was starved for something Marcus couldn't comprehend. It reached out. Marcus couldn't breathe. His mind screamed at him to run, to escape, but his body refused to listen. And then, just as the figure's hand reached for him, the darkness consumed him once again. The darkness was alive. It pressed in on Marcus from all sides, thick and suffocating, as if it were a tangible force wrapping around his body, constricting his breath. His heart pounded in his chest, the frantic rhythm echoing in his ears, as his eyes darted frantically in every direction. He tried to move, but his limbs felt like they were trapped in molasses, slow and heavy. He was no longer sure where he was. The air was colder now, colder than it had ever been, and there was a strange, unnatural stillness that hung over the entire space, as though even the forest itself had ceased to exist. All he could hear was the sound of his own breath and the terrifying scrape of something. No, someone slowly moving through the darkness. The figure. He remembered the figure from before, its long, twisted limbs, its glowing red eyes. He had turned away from it, but somehow, it was still with him. It lingered in the shadows, always just out of sight, watching, waiting for the right moment to strike. The scraping sound was closer now. It was coming from all around him, echoing through the black void. It was almost like claws dragging against the earth, slow and deliberate. And then, there was a whisper, soft, malevolent. "You can't escape." The voice seemed to surround him, filling the empty space, coming from every direction. It was so close, so intimate, as though it were inside his very mind. He wanted to scream, to run, but his body betrayed him. He was trapped. And worse, he knew it knew. There was nowhere to hide. He couldn't remember how he had gotten here, how he had ended up in this black abyss. The only thing he knew for certain was that the forest had drawn him in. It had ensnared him, and now he was its prisoner. A low laugh broke the silence, sending chills crawling down his spine. It was the same voice, but this time it was different. It was filled with malice, as if it were savoring his terror. "You thought you could leave," the voice mocked. "You thought you could escape the woods, but you are not the first to wander here, and you will not be the last." Marcus felt his throat tighten. He wanted to shout, to demand answer, but his voice wouldn't come. Every word he tried to speak seemed to vanish into the thick, oppressive air, swallowed by the darkness. "Why me?" Marcus finally managed to choke out, his voice barely a whisper. For a moment there was silence. Then, the voice spoke again, slower this time, dragging each word out like it was savoring the moment. "You are not special. You are like the others, drawn to the woods, drawn to the darkness. It waits for those like you, those who are lost." The words settled into Marcus's mind, heavy and suffocating. Lost, that's what he was. Lost. He didn't belong here, but somehow the woods had pulled him in, just like it had with the others who had disappeared. "No," he gasped, struggling to break free of the dark grip tightening around his chest. "I don't belong here. I have to get out." The laughter returned, colder and more mocking than before. "You've already been here too long. There's no way out now." Marcus's breath quickened. He couldn't stay here. He couldn't be trapped in this place, in this endless night, with that thing lurking just beyond his sight. He had to find a way out. He had to, but how? Suddenly, the ground beneath him shifted, the stones beneath his hands trembling, as though the earth itself was moving. The darkness seemed to swirl, growing thicker, closing in on him. A powerful force pulled him forward, dragging him through the void, and Marcus screamed as his body was yanked uncontrollably. He tried to fight it, to push back, but it was useless. Whatever had taken hold of him was too strong. His limbs were no longer his own, and he was no longer moving of his own volition. He was being pulled deeper into the forest's heart, deeper into the very thing that had ensnared him. The force pushed him forward, faster now, until the air itself seemed to grow heavier. He could taste it in his mouth, cold, bitter, like death. The woods whispered around him, a soft rustling like wind through dead branches, but it was no wind. It was the voices of those who had come before him, those who had been taken by the darkness. "They never leave," the voice echoed, chilling him to the bone. The trees began to emerge from the shadows, their twisted forms stretching up toward the sky. Their branches were gnarled and broken, like skeletal hands reaching for the heavens. Marcus's eyes darted from tree to tree, each one more grotesque than the last. They were alive, he realized, not in the way that animals or humans were alive, but in a way that defied reason. Their bark shifted and writhed like flesh, their roots reaching out like claws, dragging the earth down into the abyss. The voice spoke again, close, almost too close. "You are part of us now." A cold, clammy hand brushed against Marcus's face, sending a jolt of terror through him. He turned, but there was no one there. His breath came in sharp gasps, his body trembling with fear, but no matter how much he fought against it, the pull of the forest kept him moving forward. He was being drawn to something, to the heart of the woods, and there, at the center, he would find his fate. The darkness around him seemed to intensify, crushing him under its weight. The trees closed in, their branches scraping against each other, their whispers growing louder, more urgent. "You are lost, Marcus, and you will never leave." The words were final, cold as ice. They settled into his bones, filling every inch of him with dread. The grip of the forest tightened, and Marcus realized, with sickening clarity, that there was no escape. The woods had claimed him, and no one, nothing, could save him now. And then, just when he thought he couldn't bear it any longer, he felt it. Presence. Something moving within the shadows, closer to him than he had ever known. He wasn't alone anymore. Thank you for watching The Silent Woods. If you enjoyed the story and want more spine-chilling tales to keep you up at night, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to Mr. Dar's Nights, and ring the bell so you never miss another terrifying journey into the unknown. Got a story that haunted you? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear what you think, or if you have any creepy experiences you want to share. Until next time, remember, the night is darker than you think, and sometimes the things you hear are not the wind. Stay safe, stay sane, and as always, good night from Mr. Dar's Nights.